Welcome, guys, to the Manaverse podcast. I'm not going to do the usual intro. I'm just going to jump into the conversation. Right now I have the wonderful Matthew Vercant and Pat Fuge. Fuge? Did I pronounce that correctly?
You got it right, Fuge. Yep. Anything but fudge is good.
Cool. And we're gonna do we're gonna have a fun little discussion. We haven't had more than one, like a one-on-one conversation on the podcast for a while, so it's good to get back into this and have more of a more roundtable kind of feel to it. But thanks for coming on, the guys, and let's do a quick introductions for people who maybe never met you before, but let us know who we're talking to today. Who wants to go first?
Thanks, Pat. My name is Matthew Vercant. I own Just Games in Rochester, New York.
And I'm Pat Fuge. I own Gnome Games and the Noshery in Wisconsin with four locations currently.
Excellent. And so Matt's been on the podcast in the past. It's been a while. It was several years ago, I think, since we did the recording. But definitely go back and check out his interview. That was a really good interview. And I actually just spoke to Pat. His interview is coming out very soon, so look forward to that one. But so today we were going to discuss, kind of breaking down one of the articles that was recently released on Polygon that kind of made the rounds in the industry, and people started talking about, what was going to happen. What does the future of the friendly local game store look like? Is it, our game store, is the retail version of the game store doomed? What do you guys think?
Well, Pat, if you don't mind, I'll go first because I think your experience with cafes is going to be a more interesting follow-up. Cards on the table, Tom. I kind of think if it were doomed, Barnes & Noble would have put us all out of business over a decade ago, and they put Starbucks in there next to their board game section. I think the first time I came on, I said I think bad retail is going to have a hard time going forward, and I think that's still true. I think if you're not training your skills in your staff and you don't have a real business plan under you and you really have an idea of who your market and your audience is, you're going to struggle. I suspect for cafes, if you've got the location and the market and it fits into your sort of vision of what you want your business to be, you can probably make a killing at it. Personally, I have zero restaurateur skills and no interest in acquiring them. So I know I would hemorrhage money to try, so I've never made the attempt. But somebody like Pat, who seems to just be able to pick skills up left and right, Pat, I'm sure you're having a totally different experience.
It's different, but you hit the nail on the head. We've been doing this 20 years, and when we first opened, the in-store play experience was not a thing. I mean, back in the early 2000s, we got told we were crazy when we were going to a massive 3,000 square foot store with half of it dedicated OP space. And I think the evolution of the hobby game industry is going to continue with improving the experience of the player, whether it's like the facility I'm in right now, which is a new style of board game cafe, to the classic high-end play experiences, to whatever it is. The good retailers are very agile. They're going to look at their market and they're going to find ways to have that experience so the market rewards them for doing it. But again, as Matthew said, bad retailers, they're just going to go away. And that's, since the beginning of time, that's the way it's worked. We watched Toys R Us go away at one point in time. Toys R Us was the vile, evil enemy of everybody who sold Pokemon. So, it's the future isn't as bleak as I think some people think it is, but, we're going to make it work.
It seems like every year there's been a different boogeyman. You mentioned Toys R Us, right? It's like go 12 months and pick another enemy that's going to put local retail out of business. I mentioned to Tom just before we hit record that this is just under 20 years for me. So you've been at it a little bit longer than I have. Yep. I feel like there's been as many things killing the store as there have been years that I've done it, and I feel like the cafe is a great kind of market expansion, right? It's serving a different group, serving that group differently. It's a market adjustment, but I kind of wish we had a cafe or a themed restaurant locally that I could kind of work with, somebody with that skill set, but we don't. And so, we kind of float around that space thinking, there's probably people out there we're not reaching currently.
Right. And that's just it. I look at my three markets, and in two of the markets, a cafe would go great. And in the third market, I'd I'd be better off standing out and handing $5 bills going by. I'd go broke slower. It's just the way it is, and we have to figure out how to do that. My big concern is this perception that I can all of a sudden become a successful either small restaurant, small cafe because I'm having people with board games at the tables, or rescue a dying game store by starting to serve food. And it's going to die faster on both ends. You've got to have great food service, and food service requires turning at tables. And, in-store gameplay is counterintuitive to that. So, I know quite a few places have fairly successfully gone to the charge by the hours type method, but when we do the math, unless there's alcohol involved, it really doesn't hit the highest potential that you can. And that's our job in business, is to actually maximize the potential and the experience for the customer.
For sure. And I think, Matt, you made a really interesting point when we originally just kind of discussing the idea about how the game cafe model that they seem to cite in the article is more of the snakes and lattes version, where it's like, like Pat said, it's either you sit down at the table and you're paying a certain rate, $5 for the table, and then you get access to the game library. But that's not really what a friendly local game store does in its entirety, right? Like they can't. They're not embodying the full experience of what a retail, or like a really well done retail operation can be. So saying that the game cafe is taking over for, the average LGS style business isn't really, like, they're not playing the same game, right? So I thought that was a very interesting take on that thing. So why do you feel like, that version is not necessarily a good comparison?
So I think it's just a different business model is kind of what I was getting at with that comment. You're talking about essentially a themed cafe that's using games to bring people in and sell them food and beverages. And again, I don't know much about the food and beverage service, but I see a lot of themed restaurants locally. They seem to do pretty well. They all have kind of a different get you in the door, get you to stay for 2 hours, get you to buy your meal, or get you to buy a couple of beers, or whatever it is they're doing. I suspect, if you have a spot that's great for a cafe, I mean, Pat mentioned he has one market he wouldn't want to open one in. I think if you have a location that's good for a cafe, it may not be good for retail. If you have a location that's good for retail, it's not necessarily good for a cafe. So, I think whatever you're doing, you're opening the business that's right for the market that fills a need in that market. That's kind of the job of a business plan. It's kind of the job of a business owner. Figure out what the customer's need is and meet that. If there's somebody out there kind of looking at opening a store and they're thinking, well, I'll open a restaurant or I'll open a store because that's what I know. Well, what may not be what your market needs. So I think that market analysis is just really, really key. And in some cases, maybe it's a hybrid, right? Maybe that's going to make twice as much money, be twice as good. But in some cases, it might just be one or the other or neither.
Yeah, and that makes it, we looked at it from just the restaurant side, and it's the same thing. You don't put a fast food pizza place in a high-end market. You go for high-end tables, low table turns, and you still sell that piece of beef for 5 times what you would at a burger joint. That's the experience that you get. And trying to classify that board game cafe into a small type of operation like that is really pretty close-minded, and it really limits your potential.
So for people who are thinking about, maybe I do want to open a cafe, or maybe I do want a retail store, I'm not sure, I'm in the middle. How would you say, what should they do to figure out what's the best option for them? How do they do that research? Like, I guess this would be a good question for Pat. How did you figure out that, yes, cafe is going to work here? What were like the variables that made you certain that you were going to, be successful and not roll the dice on something unnecessary?
The property I'm in right now is a high-traffic tourist town, and we knew from 7 or 8 years of research on this in this area where we needed to be, and we had full intent of opening up a very high-end specialized game store up here, but the property that we were able to get into was already set for a kitchen, and both Paula and I had some food and beverage experience prior to that. We have enough resources that we could do it right. And so it really made a lot of sense for it. But we spent a year on the business plan, and it wasn't, it wasn't an afternoon, hey, we're going to do this, and we still had, a lot of things that just, and if, on the food and beverage side, that just don't make sense to a gamer, a game store, the frequency of ordering and, the big decision, do we have a deep fryer or not have a deep fryer? There's so many variables in the food and beverage side that don't come into play on the game side. And then you flip it upside down on the game side. Now, how are we going to complement this and sell things? In this particular property, I've only got about 20% of the inventory I have in my other stores because this is a high turn facility. So, we're going to sell 100 games, we're going to sell multiple 100 copies of, versus in my other stores, I'm going to have 1,000 games I'm going to sell 2 copies of. It's a very different model. And that's all in the planning process. The hybrid model of the cafe and the retail requires a lot more resources, both in intellectual resources and also in management capabilities. I couldn't do this myself. I've got to have a good team already landing on your feet. And for a new location, a game store can open with literally a white table and 4 chairs and a cash box. We've seen that for the last 20 years, and potentially make it. You can't do that with a restaurant.
Resources and experience, right? That's nail
Right.
on the head, right? If you've got to have resources, you've got to have experience for whatever model you're trying to open. And I would think, certainly from what I've researched of restaurants, if you go in without experience or resources, you will definitely fail faster than if you go in with a table and a cash box.
Even food trucks they're going the other direction. The next thing we're going to see Pokemon and Magic selling food trucks, right? You can get your hot dog, your soda, and a pack of Pokemon, right? There we go.
Well, the thing is becoming more mainstream, so you might be, clairvoyant. You might be seeing the future right now as to how things are going to play out. That may be a joke right now, but maybe the future very soon.
I've got a neighbor with a dozen food trucks, Pat, if you want to work on that.
No. Can you say I'm in the twilight? I want to get out of this in the next 10 years somehow. So
what were some of the other boogeymen in the past that people have been going on about? I know that, every Magic set, there's always a collection of, or there's always a subset of the population that this is the end of the game. It's all gone downhill from here. So I'm sure there's people like that in the industry. What other boogeymen have game stores encountered in the past that we've overcome?
I mean, years ago, at Gamma, there was talk about game stores being an obsolete model, and then it was talk about the internet and Amazon specifically. And I mean, I'm sure I'm going to forget things, but it's almost to a silly degree how consistent it is that there's any change at all, and that's going to be the end of game stores as we know them. And other trades must be like this, but I'm probably more aware of it. The sky is always falling in the game.
yeah, I mean, we had things when Wizards lost Pokemon. Oh my God, it's going to be the end of Pokemon. Now look at where we are now. We're totally upside down. Cool Mini came on, they're going to destroy us. It's literally pick your bad guy of the week type of thing.
Games, right? Kickstarter. Yeah. That was it. We'd never sell a board game again.
Had we stayed in the same model that we were, though, we would be gone. And that's the whole thing that everybody forgets about is good retailers are highly adaptable. They sit down, they figure out what the challenges are. Guys like Matthew, they look ahead and say, okay, where do we need to be 3 years from now based on what we see today? And that's already in plan. So what are you going to do about this new beta set, Matthew?
Well, we kind of have a big segment of our marketing, and Tom and I have talked about this, is doing, community events that are more like charity fundraisers, that kind of thing, benefits, right? And so I see any product that comes down the pipeline where I'm told you have a finite number and it's probably going to be single digits. That's already where my head is, right? Because I'm not going to be able to make happy customers. Even if I had 75 people that wanted to spend $1,000 a pack, I'm not going to get 75 packs. So it makes more sense to do something that generates community involvement without having to have everyone get that thing. But that's me. I mean, I think a lot of stores are going to have different solutions to that.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and that goes back to the longevity, is getting involved in your community, whatever it is. you've done your fundraisers and stuff. We do silly things like racing and going to schools and stuff like that. It's all where we fit in and what we do. And on the new beta stuff, we're on the same sheet of music. Is how can I leverage that to build my community more than to pay my rent for the month.
Yeah. The dollars, I think, are less important than getting as much engagement out of that opportunity as you can.
And we should probably explain what's happening as well, just for someone who has not yet seen the announcement that Wizards recently decided that for the 30th anniversary, they're going to release a special, very limited, how limited we know exactly, but limited print run of essentially a reprinting of beta that people can buy for $9.99 for 4 booster packs and get a chance to open up all kinds of crazy stuff like Power 9 and Black Lotuses and the retro card frame and the brand new card frame and all of that kind of wackiness. But this was for something that's like fresh off the press. This thing was received very differently from different groups, and there's a lot of people who are equally like upset as well as excited. So it's very interesting.
It's almost as though one of the goals of social media advertising is to generate enough outrage that people spread that message around for you, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yep. And here we are, right? We're talking about it, so
we're doing it. It's working.
Mission accomplished.
I think there's a grain of, getting into the podcast, kind of like Core, right? There's a grain of maybe you don't want to go with the outrage method for your marketing, but getting people talking about what your brand is doing is such a key skill to develop. And you can, love or hate what an individual company is doing, but Wizards is very good at getting you to talk about their brand.
They're awesome at it, and it's how we decide to run with it. In the big picture of things, it's a non-entity, really, for any of the retailers that are going to get anything out of it. Maybe some secondary market churn, but nothing serious.
Yeah, I'm more interested in seeing what kind of content comes out of it, because people opening up beta booster packs is certainly an exciting thing to see. Doesn't happen every day, so this is kind of like a way of going back in time, getting your chance at opening something kind of crazy, kind of ridiculous. So I'm sure once these, hit the market and customers start actually receiving their boxes, that I'm sure there will be a surge of people, opening these packs on YouTube and that sort of thing. So that'll be interesting. That kind of stuff. I definitely see that as like another avenue that stores, if they want to, open their packs, that's primo content if you want to put that out on social media. Like, people will be tuning in for that for sure. But I definitely like the angle of using it as a community building tool.
There are stores with content creation as part of their model. I think this is a golden opportunity.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we have to be aware of is that everybody and their brother is going to be doing it at the same time. And so it'll be kind of like last year when we had all the Pokemon folks opening it and everybody else was hopping in on it. All of a sudden there was just so much Pokemon being opened that it became spam content virtually. So, it's going to be interesting to see how fast it comes, how fast it gets so big that nobody wants to watch it, and then how fast it goes away.
I'm surprised nobody said that this is the end of Magic and it's game over from here. Or maybe that is being said. Maybe that's
it is. We don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess there were enough people. Like there was that, like I was saying before, that the post from Marrow about how they'll never ever reprint reserve list cards, and that's been a thing for a long time, for like a couple of decades now. People talking about, what about the reserve list? What is this going to mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And how this was this protected property, this protected asset that they were never ever going to touch or do anything with or mess with, and that your investment is safe. And they were concerned about potential lawsuits and all kinds of stuff. What are the odds that this is going to blow up in their face?
I think Pat's staff has a point going on it, right? So, what odds are they giving each other?
There's the in-house pool as to when the first lawsuit's going to be filed. Who knows? It's more tongue-in-cheek. It's it goes along with the boogeyman type thing. Is it going to happen? Isn't it going to happen? It really has no ramification on anything that we do. Vintage Magic is about as dead as it gets. It's a collector's thing. And for those that are in the high-end collectibles, that's cool. It's cardboard Funko Pops. There we go with a big price tag.
It's very funny. Our community manager used almost that exact phrase about 15 minutes after that tweet came out this morning. So I think there's a lot of heads in the same place in retail. I think the only thing I think is maybe a little surprising that we haven't heard. I mean, I would have expected this to be something you could draft at Magic 30 with everything Wizards has been doing there. I doubt that announcement is coming, but it seems like a strange decision.
That would be cool.
I would want to draft
cool.
that.
That'd be the most expensive draft ever.
Yeah, right. But if I'm going to got that money and I'm going to spend it anyway, I want to play.
There you go.
Yeah. You and some other friends throw down $8,000, and boom, you got a beta draft going on.
Law firm draft, doctor's office draft, race car draft.
And that goes back to the experience. If you've got a bunch of doctors, attorneys, lawyers, whatever they are, that want to do it, and you've got the finances to do it, more power to Wizards for engaging that's very tiny segment of the community. It's the average game store isn't going to see that because we grow gamers. Now it's Wizards' time to pick the fruit. So
it's very interesting. I'm really interested to see what happens, how it plays out, and how the market responds, and how everybody feels about it going forward. It will be very interesting to see what happens. I'm wondering how they're going to top it. What's the 35th anniversary going to look like, or the 40th? Assuming they get there, assuming things keep rolling the way they do.
That's their R&D folks, and they're getting to the end of the life cycle of, you got 30 years in there. There's almost nobody left that was working there originally. And pretty soon you're going to not have anybody around to do that. So, what does the true next generation of Magic look like? Or anything tabletop. We've gone through a full generation of Pokemon where we've got a new generation in. The Magic generation is just starting, but now we have an entire new generation of developers with all the licenses that they have to go after. Are we going to see a Star Wars Magic? Are we going to see whatever? We're already seeing the licenses that Hasbro's got. Will the mouse play along? I think the bigger story is what is Ravensburger going to drain off the side, and is Disney going to stay with Ravensburger and deny Hasbro access on the trading card side?
We have a lot of interest from our Magic community already on Lorcana.
Yep.
So yeah, that's something we're watching pretty closely too. I think there's a lot of potential there to build a great new community of people that maybe haven't been as engaged with hobby gaming, which is great. But it will be kind of fascinating to watch the sort of back-end publisher drama play out too.
Yeah, no, Wizards is obviously moving in that direction. Everything's a crossover now. They're playing pretty nicely with a lot of other places, and it seems to be doing reasonably well. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the future there is, certain properties that make their way onto Magic cards that are not going to at the moment. But I guess a lot of it will depend on the success of Lorcana, whether or not that becomes something that they're going to invest in to compete directly against Magic or not, or if they're going to leverage it in some other ways. They got a real uphill battle, though. No matter how popular it is, how many games have we seen, over the last 15 years, get the hype about how this is the new hot game that's going to be the trading card game, and then it dies out after a couple of years, and then that's gone. Other than Pokemon, nothing has really had that. I guess Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Are the only ones that have had any real longevity.
Well, they've been able to manage their brand effectively. The big three, that's what they do, is they manage the brand and make all those decisions around the brand rather than, chasing the pop or the fanboy stuff. We watch so many games come out that it's going to be the next great competitive game. And, from where I sit, competitive players are great. They drive interest, but they don't grow the game. And, it's over the long term. And they actually, in many communities, are detrimental to the growth of the community.
I think something that you said earlier about kind of retail's job is making gamers, or you said something very similar, making new people. I think I tend to think about these things less in terms of the longevity of the game as a game and what kind of community it brings into the hobby gaming space, right? So when Star Wars Destiny, since you mentioned Star Wars, was a huge game, we had maybe 20 or 30 players that stuck with that game for a very long time, some of whom were gamers, but some of whom had never played a game in a game store before. So for me, the acid test for that is not, does Destiny survive against Magic for 30 years? I mean, you look at TCGs as your example, and nothing has survived for 30 years. So the answer is no. If you're a betting person, it's not going to last that long. But how long do those customers, do those players, how long do they last? Do they move over to something else? Do they move to Star Wars Legion or a non-collectible game or another trading card game or board games? So that's kind of how I measure the success of a game. It's less about the game and it's more, can we engage with those people and provide them with the kind of service that they come back for and the kind of community that they come back for long term.
I think
that's just longevity. That's good business, right? It's why we're both here, Matthew. That's what we've been able to do for 20 years, right?
We're giving Tom these very controlled business people answers here, and maybe not the Magic Beta Pack outrage that we're supposed to be having.
No, this is perfect. This is a great mix of definite awesome advice, and then also just complete baseless speculation on what's going to happen. So this is exactly what I was hoping to have. Exactly what I was hoping to get. But no, I think that's a really good point,
what do you expect after 4 hours after the announcement?
Exactly.
You can read the article out loud very dramatically.
I'm sure we could. It's not very long. It's actually a pretty short one. But
it probably only takes 3 minutes.
Yeah. But I really like that point, though. That's a really interesting point about which games, when the person I think Force of Will or something like that, something that blew up for a brief period of time and then kind of fizzled out. How many of those players, when they went to their local game stores, did they continue going to their local game stores after their favorite thing that brought them in? Did it capture their attention enough to go on to something else? And I wonder how much of that is the nature of the game and just the kinds of people that the game attracts, and how much of it is the store that was facilitating that community, and how much did they provide to kind of build that goodwill that turned them into maybe long-term customers or something like that.
I think we've seen that over the years with even with Magic communities and Yu-Gi-Oh communities, where you'll have this group of players that play together socially and they have a blast doing it, and we have a bad set and some get out, but they still get together. And I know a lot of them still do board game nights, board game weekends into micro communities. And so what we've done is we've created small little tiny communities inside our larger community of people who enjoy the social experience at the table, whether it's cards, boards, dice, miniatures, it doesn't matter. It's the people around the table and the fun that they have. And for the successful game store, we realize that they may not always want Magic, and we don't need to chase that as hard as we want. They may not Pokemon, and they may not want 40K. It doesn't matter what it is. We want them to come back to us for that good feeling of the experience, or something that they can take to the table and make that experience for their new friends. And that's where we win.
I don't disagree with anything that Pat said. I mean, one of the metrics that we look at is, there's always this conversation when you talk about TCGs, so I'm just going to set them aside, but it's how many people are in your game room is one of these metrics, and it's the wrong metric, right? It's not how many people are in the game room. We've seen this during COVID, right? We had no one in our game room for a while, and we still had people buying through our website, and we were doing deliveries, right? And then we came out of COVID, and we had people in our game room, and we found that we had more customers than when we went into lockdown. If you're doing your job properly, you're providing what the customer needs now, and that helps you build that community, whether that's playing in their house or playing in the store or playing at school or playing at the VFW or the church or what. It doesn't really matter, right? You try to get them the experience where they're going to be. And if that's Magic, great. And if it's board games, okay, like Pat said, that's all kind of the same thing. You're selling the fun, you're not selling the product.
Right. That's exactly it. If we step back and look 10 years ago, when Wizards was kind of talking about the WPM Premium program, and you got to have snacks and you got to have chips and soda is what you're going to make it at. No, experience is where you're going to make it at. Chips and soda might be a revenue thing. Food in a restaurant, in a cafe might be a revenue thing, but it's all about that experience at the table. And making those memories. When we can hit that happy space inside a person's soul, they're going to come back.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the one thing that defines a game store more than anything else. And it's the thing that's the reason why it has such a special place in people's hearts. I would imagine almost a universal experience for game store owners is that they, at some point in their past, had that experience somewhere else, and they wanted to recreate it. And that's the thing that captured their attention. That's why they got into the business. And I won't put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming that's something that might have happened for you too, because that's a very common thing, right? It's one of the reasons why there are so many game stores, unfortunately and fortunately, that pop up, because people have that experience and they want to share it, right? But they might not necessarily be prepared to do it in a way that's long-term success. But that's a thing that, like, if you can create an environment that replicates that consistently and gives that to the customers consistently, then I think you have a really good chance of making it, for the long term, right? Actually creating a business that will be successful for you, but also successful for your customers, and something that people really, really like and really enjoy and want to keep coming back to.
Yeah, I think create is kind of the key word, right? I tend to think of a business like, like a written document, or like anything else that a person makes, like a painting, right? Nothing is happening accidentally, right? Everything that happens should be deliberate. You have an idea of who your target audience is. You should have an idea how you're going to reach them and what they want, and you're creating the atmosphere and the environment that you hope they will really appreciate and love and come back to. And for a lot of us, there were things that we loved about stores in the past or communities in the past, and we're going to bring that into the business that we're running. For me, a lot of keeps me engaged is that community building element, right? It's not really the product past a certain point; it's the people. And I think finding ways to fill those social needs, that's what excites me now, 20 years on.
Yeah, I agree, Matthew. That's what does it, and our ability to actually get out there and engage, listen, and adapt. It's one of the things that I see so many young store owners or new store owners is I'm in my store from 8 in the morning till midnight, 7 days a week. I never get out in the community. How do I get out into that community? And you've got to build that into your plan right from day one. Get outside, do whatever you have to do to make that work, because expecting to be able to interact inside your house is really difficult.
Yeah. Marketing is a good way of doing that. Marketing is how you kind of send out your messages outside your walls and start reaching some new people. But sometimes you have to get out there and beat the street. And I think
it's tough when you're new too, because your resources are more limited. You may not have a large staff. You may not have any staff in some cases, and then that's challenging, because you can get stuck in this cycle where you're just marketing product and not marketing the experience. And that's whether you know it or not, that can just kind of lead you in a progression where you just kind of down over many years. And honestly, I've told a lot of people, if that's as much as your plan is, like, go do any other noble thing with your life, but don't waste your time in retail. Like, there's so many other things that you could do that you enjoy more and would let you engage with people more and would feel meaningful to you as well.
Yeah, if you're not getting that self-fulfillment out of it, and you're just trying to do it to have your buddies sitting around the table, that's cool, but you're never gonna grow. There's a finite limit to the number of people that want to sit around my table, personally, one-on-one.
And I would argue that your buddies will probably sit around your table anyway. They sit around my table, so I don't need a store for that.
But
yeah,
right,
way more
exactly.
fun without the burden of a business having to manage everything and the stress that comes along with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the industry is not for everybody. It takes a very special person with the right skill set and the right resources to make it. And I know that one of the more common reactions to someone being like, "Oh, I want to start a game store," is like, probably don't. Wherever you're at, you're most likely you're not ready for it. There's a mix. I've always felt kind of like, I know that there's a bit of a jaded experience that comes from having a bunch of people pop up and fail, and seeing all the stress and the devastation that comes along with a business that doesn't go well. And that's not fun to watching other people do that or experience it. But I also feel like I don't want to kill dreams, So like there's a mix of like, go for it. Like if you feel like you got it and you believe in yourself and you know what you're doing, you have what you need, then do it. But there's definitely like a threshold of encouragement, I guess, that you want to or a balance of encouragement.
Right.
Get to.
It always amazes me. I'll get a call every week or two. Hey, I want to open a game store. What should I do? I've got $10,000 in the big Magic collection or big Pokemon collection, and well, why? Well, I just want to do it. Now, you really kind of need to know that why inside, and understand it.
Yeah, and I think you don't want to give you don't want to crush dreams, Tom, but you also don't want to sow misery out there, right? And
Yeah.
why? I, I've said this to friends, to family, to people who ask about opening stores. Right? I would rather know the why and fail trying, but know why I tried, and go out there and say, "Well, I tried and I didn't really know why I was doing it and I failed," and like you're just wasting your time, right? It's one thing to go out with a vision and try to
Yeah.
execute it and fail at it. That's life. But it's quite another one to go out and be like, "Well, I had a bunch of stuff, so I opened a store." What was the point, though, right? How did what did that fulfill for you?
Yeah, yeah. And like I think that comes from that experience, right? That they have this feel good experience and they just want to feel good all the time. And they feel like it's part of that mismatch expectation, right? People think that I'm going to own a game store and that means playing games with my friends all day and it's just going to be great, awesome, smooth sailing from here on out. And that's not the reality of what the thing is. And I think that's part of it is that they have this experience with this business model. They had great experiences with their friends, great experiences with the games. It finds them as an identity, and they just want to like do that all the time. It's just they probably don't realize that that's not exactly what the reality ends up being. And I can certainly appreciate the people who are trying to dissuade those and be like, I'm going to save you a lot of pain and a lot of heartache. Just stick to the kitchen table and enjoy your hobby and play with your friends because that's the thing that you want, right? That's this thing that you should be focusing on. And put your energy and effort towards something that maybe allows you to facilitate that on your off time, right? Maybe there's the best of both worlds here. It's a fine line to walk though, and the internet's not a good place for subtlety. So it usually comes out with, this is the worst idea you've ever had, or
Right.
somebody who's completely like, yeah, go for it, live your dreams, whatever motivational quote you want to throw out there, right? Like, yeah, it's challenging talking to a lot of people all at once because everyone's got an individual story and they, different positions and different thoughts and different reasons, and one person might be the perfect best, game store owner ever. I mean, it's the perfect one. The other one might be somebody who would never possibly make it or be miserable if they did, and you don't really know who's who. Right? You kind of just have to. Here's my advice.
And we were talking about the cafes. The same exact discussion is what I see on the new restaurant forums as well. Is why do you want to open it? Well, because I want to cook. Well, you really, if you own a restaurant, you hopefully aren't cooking every day because then the other stuff isn't getting done either. So it's that board game cafe. You actually double up the resource requirements especially on the top end. And to do it right is a lot more difficult than to do either one right.
Yeah, and I would think too, particularly if you've got restaurateurs and food and beverage people who are going into it because they love cooking or they love the experience of eating with their friends, I doubt you're going to get much of that. You really have to have the why am I opening a restaurant in this spot in this market question figured out. Not I love food, right? I love food. I would never open.
What our motivation was is we wanted to let families have a great experience at the table in a different way. And so it was a marriage of the two, the play experience at the table along with the light food that we do. I'm not saying you never see a steak or seafood dinner here, but we have the best darn grilled cheese sandwiches in all of northeastern Wisconsin, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah, the way that I always thought about it was there's like most people come at it with a passion for games, but like you're saying, like just because you have a passion for food doesn't mean that you're going to open a restaurant. That you're probably gonna lose your passion for food if that's what you're actually gonna do. But if you have that passion for games, that's why most game store owners like kick things off. Is like, oh, I've got gaming is my thing. It's who I am. I want to do that, full time. I want to make that a job somehow. But you need other components if you want to make it so that's actually going to be something that you enjoy and something that you can be successful at. And the two things that I think kind of set people apart are: do you like to host? Like hosting in the sense of like I like to have people around and I like to facilitate their experience and I like to have I like to mingle and talk to people and I like to get to know them and that like classic host. Like, are you comfortable having a lot of people in your house and just kind of having them in your environment and kind of controlling and curating and making sure they're having a good time? If you're one of those people, you might be good, right? Because if you're the person who's like I hate people and I don't want to talk to anybody, probably not going to be. You're going to have a tough time those first few years because that's what you're going to be doing. But then also like, are you just a numbers person? Are you okay with like core business stuff? Like, are you okay doing the things that you learn in like an MBA program. Can you do that? Are you okay with math, like accounting and like the mundane numbers and stuff? And if you have those three elements, you've got a much better chance than if you've just like got the passion, or I've been playing Magic for a bazillion years or whatever. Most people come at it with. You need a few other pieces of the puzzle if you want to make it long term.
I was just going to say, I think patience is really, really key. I think there's a real impulse on the internet to speak first and think second, and I don't think that works very well in business. And I think if it does, it's damage control that you spend most of your time doing. So I think there is an element of thinking through what you're going to say before you've typed it out on Twitter. Or it'll help serve you well in marketing, but it also serves you well in customer communications.
Yeah, I think also the other thing that a lot of us that have been around have learned is to admit that we're wrong and to be able to change based on information that we have. It's we all make mistakes. We all say stupid things. I type fewer things that are stupid today than I did 5 years ago, and it evolves. And being able to do that and say, hey, I screwed up is extremely important. And in the business world, you've got to be able to do that. And a lot of times that on the competitive scene with a competitive player base, that's not something that a lot of the younger or less experienced business people are willing or able to do. And that'll cost you dearly.
Yeah, certainly adaptability, right?
100% agree on that, and that's not just a business advice thing, that's a life advice thing. If you're not willing to change your perspective, admit when you're wrong, you're going to have a tough time no matter what. Because reality will catch up with you eventually. All right, so we're coming up on the 45-minute mark. I think this would be a really great time to just baselessly, again, speculate on what the next 10 years looks like. What do you guys think? Decade from now, Magic still exists? Is it gone? Does Lorcana take over? What happens?
Well, baseless speculation. Look, I can give you that. I think you're always going to have a hunger to do things face to face, just baked into the species, right? Is Magic still around? Yeah, the cards are still going to exist. Is it still being printed? I mean, I hope so. It certainly seems to be something people love. But we've got the same questions about everything. Will D&D be online only? And my answer to that is always that there's always going to be a segment of people that want to meet in person. Is it going to be a game store? Is it going to be a cafe? Is it going to be a half virtual tabletop, half in-person experience? I don't know, man. Technology advances really, really quickly, and that's always going to be an element there. But in 10 years, and 20 years, and 50 years, there's still going to be people sitting around and playing games in person. I mean, they've got dice that are carved in, fossilized bones. I don't think that...
I agree with Matthew. We're going to evolve. We're still going to have tabletop. I think we have a huge market opportunity, with the longevity of the population. We're going to see people playing. I plan on playing games for another 30 or 40 years, and coming up on retirement, I've got 30 years of gaming where I don't have any responsibilities. So there's a huge market there that we kind of tend to forget about because we always gear towards that growing the gamer. But that's going to evolve. And I do think that technological advances that we aren't even aware of right now, there's some virtual reality things that are out there. We may be all wired in with Google glasses and virtual reality as we're walking down the street. Instead of going down the street, we're in Ravens Bluff or wherever we're at, and Matthew's in New York, you're up in Canada, and I've got two guys from Japan with us, and we're adventuring in a virtual world. I see that happening, but we're probably 10, 15 years from that. So, but who knows?
Pat, you keep talking about retirement. Could you just engineer a way that by the time I get there, there's like D&D cruises and things like that? Because right now, none of that exists.
It's on my list of how am I going to do that in retirement communities where we have that for old folks to play. But
you just 30 years of playing games, and that sounds, with no responsibilities, that sounds awesome, right? When can I get there?
No, yeah. The secret is finding the people that you want to do it with day after day after day. And I think that's where the friendly local game store they have an advantage, and that's something the online community can't do it. Online dating has failed miserably for decades. Online's, and putting people together on tabletop, it hasn't been terribly successful, and I think that's the niche that the independent retailer is going to be able to fill as long as we're willing to adapt and engage it at the community level.
I like it. I think that is a perfect place to wrap up the episode, and and kick it off to the listeners and see what they think. And, let us know your thoughts. Right. So, where can everybody find you guys? Do the plug thing. Talk about your stores, and then we'll close up.
You can find us online at justgamesrochester.com, and we're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all of those great social media networks you love.
And you've got an great email service too, Matthew. You're inspirational there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And you can find Gnome Games in the Noshery in Green Bay and Appleton, Wisconsin, and also up in Door County and Sturgeon Bay, or gnomegames.com.
Beautiful. All right, everybody, thank you very much for tuning in for another episode, and thank you, Matthew and Pat, for coming back on and having this fun conversation. This was a good time. I always enjoy some baseless speculation, and hopefully some nuggets of wisdom sprinkled in there. It's always a good time. But thank you very much for coming on the podcast. We'll talk to everybody again in the next episode.
Thanks for having us, Tom.
Yeah. Thank you.